responses to problems, not just kind of the fluff pieces, not PR, not the advocate.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Great.
Awesome.
Hi.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone, and welcome to Perugia if you just got in. We're here to talk about how to become an impact-driven newsroom. My name's Hannah. I'm getting told to pull this closer. I lead the audience team at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting.
Hi, I'm Annie Schabel. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting.
And I'm Rachel White, Executive Vice President of Philanthropic and Strategic Partnerships at The Guardian globally, and also President of theguardian.org, which is the nonprofit arm of The Guardian.
All right, so we're from California, Annie and I, and so we do a lot of like touchy-feely feelings type activities in California a lot. So we're gonna ask you guys to play along with us and kick off with turning to the person next to you. And what we want you to do is to tell each other a story about a time when you felt proud of the work that you do. So a couple minutes, turn to whoever is next to you. If you try to pick someone you don't know, and just a story about a time you were proud of the work that you do.
This is like the least British thing you could ever possibly ask.
We're like lit yoga class.
A crowd pleaser at all the time.
I wish the lights were brighter.
Yeah, me too. I don't feel like I'm well lit at all.
I feel like,
I wish I would have worn makeup. I didn't know there were going to be like photos.
do you want lipstick? I have a nude lipstick in my bag.
Turn around, come back. Well, at least I am on another panel and I'll look cuter tomorrow and only use those photos. I like that mic. You know Mike from Free Press? You know Free Press?
No, I do know Free Press.
Yeah, he's really funny. He's smiling. You're doing great so far.
I did look. I think there was less competition for this one than the one I looked at in the afternoon. I feel like no one will come. It's like up against like really, really cool things, like famous people things.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, like, oh no, we can't because we're doing our workshop. So that's right, you're doing,
So right. So I have to. I'll be gone from. Our workshop goes from 1 to
3?
no, 2 to 4. Right? Don't we have a lunch break? Right. So I'll leave from 2 to 3, and then I'll come back.
Okay.
But Ellie and Tracy
They'll be there.
will both be there, and I think maybe Annie Kelly also, who would be great. She's the editor for the Modern Day Slavery Project, which is like crazy impactful.
All right. We're going to try to bring you guys back in. I cannot whistle. All right. We're going to rein it in now. We love the enthusiasm. I'm going to have to put on my organizer hat in 1 second. All right. If you can hear me, clap once. All right. You can hear me clap twice. All right. You've heard all my California tricks now. That's all I've got. So I would love it. Does anyone want to share a story from the person sitting next to you that someone told you about why they're proud of the work that they do? Do we have any brave volunteers? There's got to be one. A person in the back. Yes.
Hello. I spoke with Emmanuel from Paris, who told me that he's a fact checker, and he recently fact checked an article where a journalist got the impending coming of an ice age incorrect, and which is a big deal for climate change purposes. And he and his team, they had to tell this journalist that this journalist got their facts wrong. But they were able to do it in a way that actually promoted cooperation and did it in a way that didn't upset the journalist. And the journalist, I guess, checked the story, rechecked their facts, updated the story, and ultimately was able to put out a story that was accurate. And I guess this is something that's pretty hard to do because Emmanuel and their team, they oftentimes have to fact check other journalists' newsrooms' stories. And, you know, that can turn out pretty poorly, but this was an instance of a good outcome.
Great. Any other brave volunteers? Just 1 or 2 more? Yes.
Thank you. Hi. So if I get the details wrong, correct me. So I spoke with Idris from Nigeria, and he did a report on corruption in school construction, and that ended up leading to an investigation by the authorities.
Wow. And 1 more. We just need 1 more. Wait, did someone? No?
We have 1 more?
Oh, sorry, that was it. Well, we can go with this. This is great. So you're kind of hearing these themes, and I'm sure you heard them in your individual conversations too, just around, there's a lot of impact that journalism can have, whether it's corruption or publishing stories about climate change or whatever you guys were talking about amongst each other. And a lot of times what is challenging about impact is that it's hard to, you know it, and journalists know it individually, editors know it. You talk about it all the time, but capturing it and having it be something that is, you have frameworks around it, is something that can be a challenge. So we're here to talk about that today. and offer you basically two kind of case studies of how we do it at Reveal, how Rachel and her team do it at The Guardian, and hopefully you can, be inspired by these. But one of the things we wanted to just say up front is that it does look different. We've worked with a lot of different newsrooms on impact throughout the last few years, and it'll look different for everyone. It'll look different for your newsroom. So we'd love if you guys ask questions, dive in when you do have questions, and keep this really conversational so that it can actually be really useful for you. So I'm going to kick it to Annie, who's going to talk through how we do this at Reveal.
Great. We're with the Center for Investigative Reporting, and so this is our mission statement. As you can see, it's very impact-driven. Our goal is to develop investigative reporting that is in the public interest and can make a difference in lives and communities. So we're the oldest investigative nonprofit newsroom in the United States. We were founded about 42 years ago. We're well known for our public radio show and podcast called Reveal. We launched Reveal 3 or 4 years ago. We've worked with hundreds of partners to produce stories for the show, as well as our own reporting. That's just a little bit of background about who we are. And so about 4 years ago, we had an opportunity to bring a fellow on board for our newsroom to kind of talk about media impact and sort of really think about a way to develop a framework for the entire newsroom. And so we kind of define impact as a change in the status quo as a result of a direct intervention reporting. And so Dr. Lindsay Greenbarber joined CIR and as the media impact analyst and developed a framework kind of from interviewing folks around the newsroom, talking to everybody. And what we really learned from that experience is that, as Hannah was saying, you kind of know impact when you see it, but we didn't really have a shared language in the newsroom or any tools to consistently track the impact of our work. So whenever we wanted to know something that happened, it was sort of like somebody's got a spreadsheet, another person has Post-its at their desk, someone else has a Word document. We didn't, really have an organizational way to collect that information. And so these are some of the reasons why we track impact. We want to understand the changes that are happening as a result of our work. Knowing this information can help inform our content strategy. It can help us build trust with audiences by being able to communicate back information about what our reporting has led to. And, with investigative reporting, it's often all bad news. We're exposing things that have happened that are pretty grim. And so being able to then share when solutions and, changes have been made is really impactful for our audiences. And obviously, I'm sure as many of you know, this is something that funders really care deeply about. So being able to share, the return on their investment. And it also, can be a key strategy for building trust with your audience to develop membership plans. So at CIR, we define impact through these kind of 3 frameworks. The micro level is changes at the individual level. So if a reader writes in or a listener and says, I stopped buying strawberries after I saw your story about pesticide use in California, that's a micro impact. Mezzo is the community level. So if we see organizing, advocacy groups, others kind of using our reporting, citing it, researchers, coalition building around stories. And then macro is kind of the gold standard. That's the institutional level, policy changes, new laws, other institutional level changes. So we developed a tool called the Impact Tracker tool that kind of captures this framework that I'm going to just sort of show you a little bit about. So this was something that Lindsay, when she came to CIR, really focused on. Kind of having a way for us to track this. So we built this tool as a way to institutionalize some of the things that we wanted to capture from that framework. And so we wanted to make it really simple for everyone to use this tool to kind of replace the spreadsheets and the Post-its that others were using. And so this is a web form, and we'll take you into the back end of the tool in a little bit, but just to kind of give you a sense of how the framework fits in here, a reporter goes to this page and we'll just, fill in description like new law proposed, the date that it happened. And then for CIR, this is completely customizable. This is an open source tool that anyone can use, and we'll give you a link to that a bit later. So for us, these are the macro changes that we care most about. This is customizable for whatever your newsroom most prioritizes. So the macro changes we're looking at are government investigations, hearings, institutional action, laws, policy changes. The Mezzo level is, as we said, at the community level. So this is, capacity building. If our content is being used in public meetings or research, someone's filing a lawsuit, or we're seeing, screenings of documentaries we've produced, advocacy groups using our work. And then micro, as I mentioned, is the individual level. So increased awareness, someone takes action when we see social media. We also track media mentions. Our news clipping service pulls into this tool. But, if we see editorials from our stories, someone localizing using data that we've made available, that's where we put that in, and then details about the publication can go there. And then these are the beats that we cover. So, for example, if it's an immigration story, we'll put that in here, and then a particular topic. So this is all completely customizable. Tags are great because you can, reporters put their names in there. So this is kind of the tool that we're using that maps up to our framework. So I think we can show a little video now. We're going to take you into an example. So we'll show you a video. It's a little bit dramatic. The reporter in it is great, but it's dramatic. And this is an investigation that we published in February 2018 about lending discrimination in the U.S. in the mortgage market. So we'll take it away.
I'm Aaron Glantz, a senior reporter at Reveal. I've broken some big stories during my time in CIR that have brought real change, but nothing as big as this. A year ago, I had this idea. We should look at the data that's available under the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. Emmanuel Martinez, one of our data journalists, started to go through this data. 31 million mortgage records.
A stunning new investigation by Reveal has uncovered evidence that African Americans and Latinos continue to be routinely denied conventional mortgage loans.
In 61 metros across the country, applicants of color are more likely to be denied a conventional mortgage.
We had a full hour on the radio, and we were able to speak directly to people who were affected by this kind of pervasive denial.
This hour, we're talking about home ownership in America. This giant government database has information on nearly every home loan application in America.
The Reveal radio program went out to over 450 national public radio member stations around the country to an audience of over 1 million people. This story broke across every platform: print, broadcast, PBS NewsHour.
As Reveal's Aaron Glantz reports, Black and Latino home buyers.
We also went wide and partnered with the Associated Press. It was on the front page in Ocala, Florida, Gainesville, Florida. It was in the Virginia Pilot on the front page, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then, on the other hand, it was in the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. And I was on Marketplace.
50 years after it was outlawed, it is still going on systemically. That's the result of a new investigation by Reveal and the Center for...
We built this incredible app where you can zoom in on any city or neighborhood in America and see who's getting loans and who's not. We developed Amplify. Just text the word loan to a certain number, and we will tell you who's getting loans and who's not in your own neighborhood.
The report has sparked national outrage.
Next month, I'll be holding hearings to get a grip on the root causes of this problem, and most importantly, hold those accountable.
I am aware of it, and frankly, I'm disgusted by it. We have launched an investigation into this.
Within a few hours, the top Democrat on the Senate Banking Committee expressed outrage that in this day and age in America, we still have this type of discrimination.
There's a research group known as Reveal.
I've shared with your staff a recent article from my hometown newspaper.
The nation's top banker had to respond.
My question is, what can the Federal Reserve do?
Racial discrimination in mortgage lending and in any kind of lending is completely unacceptable. And wherever we have authority, we will use it to stop that from happening.
Thank you. So like we said, a little dramatic, but the reason we showed you that is actually because telling those types of narratives about an impact, like an investigation like that, and all the different impacts it had from, media mentions, tweets, to actual laws being changed and hearings, all of that narrative can be really hard to craft if you're not able to actually quantify or look at all of that data together. And so that video is just an example of the types of storytelling we can do around our work that are really robust and treat each type of impact from those emails that we get from people all the way up to those laws we treat those really, like, they're all important, and they all are important in different ways. And so I think that's like what we wanted to describe, and now we'll show you how that kind of works when we're logging this stuff.
Yeah, so we're gonna kind of talk you through using the back end of the Impact Tracker tool, how the content traveled for this story and some of the drivers of impact that we saw. So I think we can just dig right into it. So this is our Impact Tracker for CIR, and as you can see, we've got over 8,000 entries of impact for our entire newsroom, which is really exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and filter so that we're just looking at the story that we just showed the video for, Kept Out. So all of these things that you can filter by are the same things we just showed you in the form. So I'm going to go to the subtopic here called Kept Out. And you'll have to bear with us. Demos can be a little clunky. So I'm going to just filter this for last year through today. Not the best Wi-Fi.
They do say never do a live demo, but we, of course, did not heed that. We're bold.
You couldn't verify who they were.
Yes, exactly. If this doesn't work, we can always come back to it, too, as Rachel talks about The Guardian.
Let's see.
I'm actually,
I think it's
is it
about
working?
to go. I think so. Woohoo. Transferring data.
Actually, as a question, though, how many people currently track impact in one way, shape, or form in their newsrooms right now? And the way that you do that, does anyone want to share, like, do you have a structured way, or is that kind of, is it kind of that, what we're talking about before we started with, like, Post-its? I'm seeing some head nodding. Does anyone have a structured way that they want to talk? Yeah?
We use Impact Tracker.
Oh, you use ours? We
And it's
didn't
great.
plant that, but that's actually great. Great.
No, it's really great. Because it actually means that we're a not-for-profit,
Yeah.
the Conversation Africa, and it means that we can weave incredible narratives around stories, which my colleague Alex does in our reports to donors or when we're trying to get funding.
Wonderful. We swear we don't tell her to say that. Yes.
I'm from an organization in South Africa, the Bikisisa Center for Health Journalism, and we use a Google spreadsheet. We pretty much enter what you have there, but not in a structured form like you, yeah.
Yes, we can relate to that. But
Great. So it looks like the internet is being kind to us, and we've now got the filter on here to just look at impact related to the Kept Out investigative series. So this is really exciting because you can see there's almost 350 instances of impact that we've tracked over the last year and a bit on this story. So we're going to take you through some examples from Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, where, as you saw in the video, although it was a national investigation, our radio piece and the kind of main place we focused on in the story was Philadelphia, because that was one of the areas where the problem was worst. So do you want to take us through?
yes.
pull up?
So as Annie finds these things, I can talk about what they are. So the first thing we're going to look at is, again, so this is all data that's input through our reporters, people on our team. It's all manually we put it in manually, and then we also scrape a press clipping service. So the first thing we're going to show is a tweet from Senator Hughes. Is it not coming up?
We are maybe not going to show the tweet from Senator
All right.
Hughes 'cause of
I think we're going to have to table this demo for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So Rachel, why don't we get to you and you can.
Can you bring my presentation up?
We absolutely.
Okay.
Sorry, everybody.
So while they're bringing up the presentation, is my microphone on? Do I need to? It's on, okay. The Guardian uses the Impact Tracker, and we've used it for a couple of years, but it's one of several tools that we use across a range of different projects to understand the impact that our journalism has. And I think it's interesting to sit alongside the Center for Investigative Reporting because the kinds of, like our model of journalism is similar, but also very distinct and different, whereas the Center for Investigative Reporting is, specifically a shop for investigations, and where the kinds of impacts you would be seeking are tangible and specific, and the kinds of things that you would see off of an investigation much of the work that we do at The Guardian, where we're using the impact tracker, and I'll be talking specifically about our philanthropically funded projects, you know, some of that is investigations, but the majority of that work is longer narratives around specific topics and reporting beats. We're looking at different things. It tends to be driven more by storytelling, and into that comes investigations. And so we look at impact a little bit differently and have a wider view on what we're seeking to understand in the impact. So can I take the deck over here?
Yeah, I think we can switch.
Okay, that's a good idea. This is like the smoothest panel ever.
Working out the
Really?
kinks.
I knew you were impressed. Oh, okay. So with that, so I say this. So we've received philanthropic support for projects, editorial projects at The Guardian for about 7 years now. There were a few at the beginning, the Gates Foundation, who supports our global development work, and the Rockefeller Foundations, who support a very robust site called Cities, which is in its 6th year. But we wondered if there was a way that we could understand two things with the philanthropic support. One of those was, could this be a durable model, part of a model for how we support our journalism around issues that matter as much to us as like-minded partners, but also increasingly, as we've gone through these past few years, using these philanthropic projects that give us a window into how our journalism drives impact as a model that can be explored across the rest of the news organization as we find ways to feel closer to our readers and deliver more by way of helping our readers understand how the journalism changes their world and changes their outlook and that sort of thing. So this slide just sort of gives you a sense that just of exactly what they were just describing, output, outcomes, and then we sort of look at micro, meso, and macro impacts. We use a suite of tools, not just the impact tracker, and I think, you know, I should say, we have the distinct advantage of being a news organization with a truly global presence and 160 million readers around the world and 24/7 news coverage, and so we have tools that are available to us that wouldn't be available to smaller newsrooms, but I think it's helpful to understand a context in which we can all work, and in which news organizations like The Guardian actually can play a role alongside places like the Center for Investigative Reporting in understanding larger narratives. But the suite of tools that we use are OFAN, which is our very own tool, owned only by The Guardian, which gives us a better understanding of what our readers like, what they actually read, what they want to know more about. Our journalists use this all day long, every day, and it's a tool that we're using to adjust headlines. We're seeing if we're getting penetration. We're moving things around on the site. We're constantly tweaking the journalism, and when we see a spike in interest in a topic, we're able to lean into that topic and follow it in a more robust way. A really good example of this is a sort of surprise investigation that we did at the end of last week and early this week. You might have read a little bit about it. In London, there were playgrounds that were segregated. Low-income children weren't being allowed into those playgrounds. This was on our city site. When we noticed an uptick in traffic on that story, we leaned into it. We published more on it. We put up some pictures. We actually we went into the community. One of the moms took a picture of her kid looking out the window. That got a lot of traction. This tool allowed us to stay with the story and follow it in the direction that our readers clearly were indicating, and it has brought about results. They tore down the wall. It was very exciting. It doesn't always happen like that, but that's OFAN, which is a tool that we have and we own. Google Analytics, which of course everyone has access to, that just allows us to systematically monitor the data on audience behavior. It gives us the metrics. It's not enough in and of itself, and again, like at a news organization like The Guardian, we'll have a lot of page views, we'll have a lot of visitors, but put together with the other tools, it becomes more valuable in understanding what we're seeing from the data, what we're seeing as impact and the insights we can glean from it. Social listening. So this is a new tool that we've added to our suite. We're using a tool called Pulsar that allows us, you can kind of see in this image that's up here, it allows us to see the networks of communities that where the journalism is gaining traction. And so if it was always hard for us to see before who was tweeting something, and we could only see that in a discrete sense, this tool allows us to see that Krista Scharfenberg tweeted something and her network followed it, which led to this network. And we can see, in particular for us, if the journalism is reaching audiences that we don't think we would have ordinarily reached. For a place like The Guardian, more conservative audiences are relevant to us, different geographies. So if we look at, in the US, for instance, when we see a lot of pickup in the central part of the country, that's something that distinguishes the journalism because it means that we reach people that we don't ordinarily reach. And then finally, the impact tracker. And this tool, alongside the other tools, has been super valuable to us because it actually, I don't know, it sort of puts something real around all of it. Our journalists are feeding into it all the time. We're keeping track of things that we're seeing, and it complements the other data that we have in our toolbox. Just a couple of quick case studies from The Guardian. I won't go into the same detail. We approach our projects in different ways. They're not all one size fits all. There's one series that we've run for a number of years. It's a series supported by Humanity United on modern-day slavery and human trafficking. That started out as a very investigations-driven series, and so we see more of the kind of results that the Center for Investigative Reporting probably sees and other investigation shops would see, which is, we put out an investigation and we see immediate impacts off of that. The thing that's interesting about this series is that we were one of the first news organizations that was really covering modern-day slavery in a robust way. That's part of the reason why the Humanity United wanted to support us to do the work. It's a crowded space now. Part of the impact of that series is that this is no longer a topic that people don't know anything about. People know a lot about this topic, and it's taken us in different directions. We're now in our 5th year of reporting on this, and we're doing less sort of reveal kind of moments of the horrors of trafficking and slavery, and we're now looking more at things like supply chains and root causes of slavery. But again, we feel like part of the impact story in our work with Humanity United is just about bringing along the wider news industry and other news outlets and wanting to cover this topic and making it so it's crowded and we have to find a new way to report it. And then, of course, the Gates Foundation has supported us for many years. I think we're in our 7th year now on our global development site. The impetus for this reporting is not so much about sort of the instantaneous, we report something happened, but our aim is share of voice and helping our readers and sort of the wider readership of people who consume news have more interest and put more attention on the topic of global development so that it's not an obscure idea, but that it's actually part of the daily news diet, and we're constantly looking at how much of share of voice we have and how much share of voice we're driving with the series. And of course we do break news on it, and we, there's lots of those elements too. It's actually a vertical on the site. I'll just show you a couple of quick things. I don't want to monopolize all the time, but just to give you a look at some of the way we think about our impact framework. This is a very dense slide. I'm happy to share any of this with anyone who wants to see it afterwards. But we look at both reach and engagement. And again, like I said before, we're deploying all of the many tools. One thing that's particularly important with us in the kinds of projects that we undertake, because we're thinking about impact in an array of different ways, is to actually come together with our philanthropic partners at the outset of a project and agree on what we hope to understand or what we want to see in the journalism. If it's not always an aha moment or a big something changed in the world, do we want to sense at the end of 2 years of reporting that an issue has gained traction with policymakers? Do we want to see an improvement in the number of people who are searching on a particular term? Do we want to poll our audience and understand that they understand an issue better than they did before? It's impact is kind of, there's nuance to it, and we try to lean into that nuance. This is our sample timeline. It's very popular. But we also have come to a realization over time that it's too easy to imagine that you launch a project and then you start to do your journalism and you measure your impact, and at the end you look and you see what you accomplished. It's a longer time frame than we want to, than we often want to imagine it takes to really achieve impact and to structure a project with impact at the heart of it. And so we now, when we think about these projects, this is a 1-year timeline, but we've tried to build in all of these elements so that we're capturing impact in a more proactive way and not kind of trying to just catch up with it at the end. And then this is just what OFAN looks like, if you wanted to know, that we look at this all day long. But this is how we can see what's happening in real time on the Guardian news site. And that's that. I'll switch back with Annie.
Awesome. I love the project timeline slide. I was telling Rachel I'm obsessed with this one. But I think it's a really good point, and we see it a lot. Yes?
Question. You were saying you look at these figures all day long. I'm just interested, who looks at them, and do you try to quarantine your journalists sometimes from looking at them too much so that they can get on with their reporting?
Good question.
We can't quarantine. I mean, it's a live and active tool in the newsroom, and it's actually like fundamental to the journalism. And so I mean, we have to make decisions all day long about what's sitting on the site and where it's sitting. But it's relevant to the journalists also in making decisions about how they'll follow a story or not. So no, we don't discipline it. I say we look at it all day long. It's probably less than you look at your phone. But it is, I think it actually gets to I remember when we first adopted the impact tracker, and I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work, and part of the rationale behind it is that like no one cares about a news story as much as the person who wrote the news story. That like it makes a lot of sense that you would want to know if your story had impact. You would want to know how many people read your story. And so, we are following these things. But equally so, editors are watching these things, so that editors can be shaping the agenda for the next day or the next week ahead or what have you.
Looks like our Wi-Fi situation has improved, so we're gonna try to take you through a demo. So as we mentioned, we're gonna look at Kept Out, and this will kind of show you the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, couple of examples of how we learned about the ways our content traveled, and some of the types of impact that we're able to track using this tool that otherwise would kind of get lost in the ether. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna have a look at is a tweet that came from Senator Hughes in Pennsylvania a few days after the investigation was published. And so, you can go into this instance of impact. You can see the date. It was one day after the investigation dropped. It's a Mezzo Level impact of a public official referring to our story, and then we've got a link out to him tweeting about our story. And so what's really important that you'll see here is who he's tagging. So we're able to see that the Legal Defense Fund has been tagged in his tweet to kind of inform them about this story. And then we'll go back. And then you'll see a couple days later, we're seeing that the Legal Defense Fund is actually then sharing the story out as well. And so we know that they received this story from Senator Hughes. So, without the impact tracker tool, we wouldn't necessarily be able to see here how this content is moving from public officials to advocacy organizations to ultimately seeing some changes. And so then a few days later, as you saw in our video, we started to see some legislative actions. So I'll just pull up investigation opened. So on the 22nd, we're seeing that Attorney General Josh Shapiro is launching an investigation. So he's tweeting this, and he's then tagging back to Senator Hughes, who he learned about the story from. So we're really able to kind of see that the way this story traveled on social media to, in less than a week, seeing some real impact from an investigation being opened in the state. And then one other great impact that we're able to collect from this tool is the micro level impact, which often, the legislative change where, we typically kind of know that that's happening. We'll publish follow-up stories, but it can be really powerful to be able to have micro impacts where we're hearing back from folks who are in our stories or getting feedback from listeners and readers. And so as you can see here, one of the people who was featured in our story texted our reporter, and we're able to kind of capture this of, her saying that, this investigation has made a real impact for her and appreciating our work. And this is the kind of impact that, without this tool could easily get lost over time. So being able to have these powerful anecdotes that we can use in newsletters, we can share these out with our funders and really be able to kind of look at that level of how people's lives are being changed by the work can be a really important way to use the tool. Great. That's kind of the tool. So I don't know, I think that was all we wanted to show on the Philadelphia stuff, and then just a few other things in the impact tracker that are helpful. One really amazing thing that kind of gets to Rachel's point about the timeline is we actually have a timeline where we can look at the time that impact takes. And so, oh, I need to unfilter this, hang on.
Yes, question while Annie's filtering. Do we have a microphone?
She's got it.
Do you log this manually? So as a journalist, you have to. Okay.
Yeah, so it's logged manually. All of our news clipping service gets pulled in, and then we just have to tag it into the story. We are lucky because as an investigative newsroom, we're not publishing a significant amount of content every day. So, you know, I think we can hear from Rachel on what that process looks like. But for us, when a big investigation comes out, that's typically the only thing that we have happening that week. So we can just go mass update everything from our news clipping service to say it's kept out and just quickly look through and make sure nothing else got tagged in. But yeah, we're like for all of the actual impact instances, we're manually entering those. And so reporters will spend time doing that. Our engagement team, our development team, it's kind of everybody in the newsroom, which can be a real challenge because often when an investigation is coming out, you know, our reporters are going and doing interviews and they maybe don't want to sit down and do data entry into the impact tracker, but it's, you know, I think that's the biggest challenge is just kind of the adoption, but having everyone in our newsroom really committed to it and having leadership kind of say like, this is a huge priority, this is, you know, this is why we do this work and we need to track it is helpful, but that's one of the ongoing challenges.
I can answer, I'll answer it for the Guardian also. So one of the things that we found really effective is we have a dedicated head of philanthropic projects who works in our London office who's sort of the repository of all of the impact tracker work. We found increasingly the journalists are interested in doing this. They want to see that the things that they're producing have impact, but also it's like kind of time consuming and they forget to do it. Ellie, who's still on a train on her way here, they are constantly emailing her and she's able to input it. And it has made a very big difference in our ability to just capture these things, to have someone who can receive it, but also to have that person be the person who's responsible for the awesome deck, but also the person who's actually doing the insight reports and helping synthesize what we're seeing across all of our different tools. It feels like a luxury, but she's baked into every single project in a really fundamental way.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I'll just put a fine point on what Rachel was saying. In that project timelines that I was saying I was obsessed with, I think setting up the framework ahead of time and letting all your reporters, everyone in the newsroom know, like, here's how we're going to track this project, here's like the name of the project, here's like what we're looking for, and really reminding everyone to put stuff in. It's a job in and of itself. And so a lot of different people at our organization prompt reporters to do that, but the manual entry piece is the only way to get a lot of that data. Yeah. And question right there.
Yeah, I run a nonprofit media in Amman, Jordan, and this is really important, but the big but is that it's a lot of manual work. I mean, you just said that.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of automated tools that you can use to scrape things that, because the journalists finish a story and they have to do another story, and it's hard to kind of convince them to spend time to impact and to put the feedback. What instruments are there that are more automated that you can kind of?
So we do have the press clipping service that pulls in all the media mentions, and you can set that up through different tags that you can use to really understand that piece of the puzzle. I don't know if you guys know of any of the manual entry around those things that only a reporter would know, like those texts. Those are things where that's just, I think the when Lindsay described kind of building out this tool, one of the pain points that she had identified is a lot of times it's not that people before this tool we use at Sierra that they didn't know about the impact. It's just it was living in someone's head or in two people's head, like the reporter and the editor, and so it's we're trying to get that out into the tool. But it's really hard to solve for the automation. I think of like that type of data. I haven't heard of an organization that does it.
I actually think because we use so many different data tools at The Guardian, it was actually implementing the impact tracker that made the very big difference in the way we were able to glean insights from our projects. There's something, like at some point, like a human actually has to interact, like tell you what they saw and what happened. All the analytic tools in the world just only get you so far, and then you can't really, this has brought a very essential element to our impact work.
Yeah, and there's a couple things that we did to try to like incentivize it. So the web form that you fill out, I can go back to that page. We tried to make it really as simple as possible so that it ideally takes 30 seconds to fill out. You can also download all of the data into an Excel file or a CSV, kind of whatever view you want, whatever filters. So our hope was that for reporters who are kind of keeping their own spreadsheet, this could replace that. The other thing that we tell them that we use it for, which we do use it for, is award submissions, because reporters love awards. And so being able to say like, hey, the more you have in there, the better your award submission will be helps. No, we have Spanish, French, and I think that's all for now, but yeah, we do have other language versions.
Sorry, please, I have a follow-up question to what he asked. Yeah, at The Guardian, how do you sort of ensure that the journalists complete or use the impact tracker? And you mentioned you have someone who sort of coordinates the process. How does the interaction work? Does the person mandate the journalists to fill whatever they need to do, or how efficient is the process?
Sometimes it's very efficient and sometimes it's less efficient. I mean, I don't want to say that it's a perfect model. I guess it's interesting because I've been in a bunch of discussions across The Guardian about how we think about this model in the way it relates to our journalism more broadly. And this is not a model that's applicable across a whole news organization with the volume of content that we're putting out every day. It's not even remotely realistic. But it is. When we think about where it's practical, it is practical around things that resemble these philanthropic projects, things that are specific to a topic, where there's an assigned editor, an editorial team who are working on something, where there's a start and an end. And it's not just like a philanthropic project where you could imagine that. You could imagine that, for instance, like with our U.S. election coverage coming up. Like that's a hideously long, time-bound process where we'll all be biting our nails and worrying. But I think, you know, it works better when it's assigned to a team who are specifically focusing on one thing. I think it would be much harder to implement. It would be harder for us to implement if it was people who were doing all kinds of different things and then they had to remember that they had to input things on the impact tracker, if that makes any sense. These are projects. I mean, they're time-bound, they're project-bound, and I think that lends some discipline.
So at Africa Check, we actually use the promise tracker, but how do you deal with a situation, I'll speak for Nigeria, how do you deal with a situation where policymakers, politicians actually call you up, sometimes send you emails to say, look, this is how your work is affecting internal processes, but they don't want to go on the record. So how do you shape that in tracking?
Great question. I don't know if we've run into that where there's been impact we've wanted to track, but it's off the record. I would imagine we'd still want to capture it in this and maybe just flag that this isn't something we're going to use in our storytelling, or we would anonymize it in the storytelling when we did it. But the nice thing about at least this tool is just that you can put in that kind of qualitative nuance. So you can describe the conversation you had and then just be like, this is off the record and we're not supposed to use it, you know, publicly. But I don't actually think we've run into that before, so interesting question.
I'm wondering how you use this information for your readers. So rather than just for reporting back to donors or partners on the impact of your stories, how is it actually getting back out to the public the effect of the reporting?
Yeah, I can answer for us, and then I'm sure you guys have answers too. So we do a lot of storytelling around it. So I think Annie mentioned this. So we don't really have any like positive things in investigative reporting. When we're like uncovering something, it's never like great, like it's really bad news. The only emotion, or the only time we get to tap into joy or anything remotely like it is when we make a change. And so actually it's really important to be communicating these changes to our reporter or to our readers and our audiences, because otherwise we're just telling them bad news all the time. So they really like when we write blog posts, newsletters, anything. We'll do podcasts on the impact of a story. We really try to let people know across all of our audiences when change happens. One, because we hope by doing that, eventually they'll probably end up supporting our work and become members, which happens. But also just so that they don't always associate our work and negative things. Like, it's important to give them that you know, that hope. And so, yeah, we do a lot of communicating around this.
Yeah, and one cool thing that has come out of using the tool is from the news clipping service. We often do big national data sets like we did with Kept Out, where we make them available to other newsrooms to localize. And there were actually a couple instances of stuff coming into the impact tracker through the news clipping service that we didn't even know about because local reporters took the work. So there was a bank that was particularly bad in upstate New York somewhere, and we saw via the impact tracker that the city had pulled their money out of that bank after our story because a local person reported on that. And so we were then able to do some follow-up posts about some of those impacts that otherwise we wouldn't have known about.
And I'm going to say the same thing they did. It's as much a part of the story what happened after we reported something as the thing that we reported in the first instance. And actually, it keeps the story alive and it keeps the spotlight on a story so that we can continue to accelerate the progress that we've made with the initial story. So it's like self-fulfilling. The more, you know, you report it, something happens, you report a little more. Like, I think that story, the city story that I was talking about earlier with the segregated playground, I mean, it was just, it's like a very interesting feedback loop of like reporting change, report it, change, and it does bring, I think it makes progress happen.
I just wanted to respond to problems raised. And I have to say my response when I was introduced to the impact track was, oh my God, you know, running journalists is like herding cats. How are we going to get them to fill the thing in? And it's really interesting. And so my operation is very small. So I think the point about it being around specific projects is really accurate. But you're right, everybody's collecting this information in some form or another, and this is just kind of a way of formalizing it. The other thing is it's an amazing morale booster. You know, like there'll be a shout out, or it'll be out in the little WhatsApp group we've got amongst the commissioning editors, and somebody will say, they'll put the tweet up, and there'll just be this, that's amazing, and it's kind of, so it's not built into our performance kind of management system, but certainly in terms of giving one another the kudos for something kind of having legs in whatever form. And I mean, listening to the stories here makes ours look really tiny, but it's nevertheless, all those tiny victories add up to making the journalists really feel it's worthwhile doing what they're doing. So I think it's it seems much worse than it actually turned out to be, persuading them to do it.
But I also think that little changes make big changes. Like, it's too much to expect that everything you do would result in a giant impact or a giant change. Like, it's not the way progress is made. I ran a policy think tank for a decade before I came here. Policy, it's a slow moving beast, and all of these little things contribute to policy outcomes. It all matters.
Yeah, and I think to that point, often our investigative stories can take years to make an impact, and so being able to like know when that finally does happen a couple years later and share that back out can be really powerful. And yeah, I mean, this little timeline chart that I have pulled up here, this will just kind of show you the long tail of impact. So this story, you know, we're still seeing impact today, and as you kind of scroll through, you see stuff continues to happen. So being able to kind of visualize that and communicate it with your audiences and funders can be really important, because often, you know, when a grant ends, it's not like, oh great, the impact is on the same timeline as my grant period. So being able to kind of have that framework to communicate with folks about the timeline is helpful.
Just one in the front.
Thank you. You are using this as a nonprofit newsroom. Do you also have examples of more commercial newsrooms using this, and how that would work?
Yeah, there's probably about over 50 newsrooms using it now of varying types. I think most of our partners are nonprofit, but there are some commercial media partners that use it, and I think they use it kind of in a similar fashion as we do. I haven't heard of any examples of folks kind of using it differently from the type of media organization they are.
I mean, we're a commercial news organization.
Just for those who were asking about tracking the story maybe more automatically, there are two initiatives, one from Brazilian journalist Pedro Burgos. He's created a tool called Impacto. It's at the moment in Portuguese only, but it tracks all the authorities municipal, regional, national, that mention the outlet or the story and the impact it has on decision-making, policy-making. And also, MIT Media Lab is developing something called Media Cloud.
Can you repeat? Thank you. Can you repeat the name of the first one again?
Impacto. .gor. And the other is, MIT Media Lab.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi. I'm wondering, how does the conversation go with funders? Are they looking for specific metrics, or are they just looking at overall performance?
I think it really varies, and what we've found to be helpful is often, I think, when the conversation with funders is, when they're saying, like, can you track these things, it's often because we aren't proactively saying this is what we care about and this is what we want to track. So what's been great about this tool is that we're able to say, these are the things that are meaningful for us, this is what helps inform our strategy, and this is what we most care about. And so often we find that being able to start from that position and saying, like, yes, we have a framework that we care about and we have this tool to track it, means that they're comfortable with letting us track the metrics that are meaningful for us rather than having to track a bunch of things just out of the absence of having a strategy around it.
And also, when I was talking about the way that we construct things, so we never promise impacts. We can't possibly promise impacts. But what we do, what sort of replaces that is that front-end conversation with the people who are supporting our work, where we agree on what we hope to understand, where we hope to see impact, where we will be watching a variety of different things to understand what the impact is. And so I think it's a pretty effective tool in answering that question, but not making a promise that you couldn't possibly deliver.
Great point.
Hi. My name's Emily Gertz, and among other things, I'm a board member of the Society of Environmental Journalists in America. And one thing we're trying to figure out how to do is to track this kind of impact of the grants, of the stories that our grant programs fund. And I mean, just listening to you talk about the adoption of these tools in your newsrooms, I'm kind of wondering, have any of you worked with a situation of that sort, like where we've got to try and track multiple outlets and plus freelance reporting often, and figure out exactly these kinds of impacts over time?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the impact tracker tool can be completely customized. So all of the drop-down fields that you saw, you can change those for what you most care about. And we actually worked with the California Endowment to spin one up for them so that they could use it to track the impact of their grants.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you after.
Great.
But one thing I would say, I think this is important. We are, The Guardian has a project with SEJ right now, the Public Lands Project, which is highly impactful. That has been like a blockbuster of a program. But I think it's so, I mean, we come across this all the time because we're constantly approached by funders who would like to fund a reporter or like a specific series of things. Impact is seen over a period of time, not like episodically on the piece of content. And so I just think it's important that we keep in mind like where you can measure impact and where you don't have enough time to show that you've had impact. Miguel actually helped me understand this better than just about anyone, but it's the duration of the longevity of the project often is what brings about the impact. It's not that it can't be done, but I think it's just important to be careful about like the limits of what an impact tool can do at the story level.
Well, I mean, that's, as a journalist, I understand that, but if you're talking about...
With the microphone, please.
Sorry. I was going to just say, I mean, yes, and I think everyone in the room who's a reporter will get that, but the question now, especially with so much philanthropy-driven journalism, is communicating that effectively to funders.
Yeah, no, that's
which
exactly right.
And now that's also including our audiences, especially like at The Guardian with your contribution model now too. I mean, and in environmental journalism, these impacts can really take a long time too. So. And I'm sure that's not the only beat where that's a conundrum as well.
Hello, I'm from The Telegraph in London. With the impact tool, why is that better
than say, when you write a story and then say the government launched an inquiry or something like that, or the police start investigating, then you would normally, as a journalist, write that up. So you will record that impact in the paper or online. Why do you think you need another tool to do that?
Great question. I think the kind of Genesis story that Lindsay tells that I think still rings true for us is, and I think we said it before too, there's something about having it structured, having this data structured and having it in all a centralized place, that it's not that we weren't reporting this and doing stories and like telling people about impact before. It's just that really lived and died with reporters and editors. And so if people like move on, like Annie was saying, this story that we showed is still having impact. Potentially, maybe we don't have a reporter replace them or the editor. So it's just taking that information and like just providing that structure for it is, I think, why we find it useful. Certainly, all of these other places that you're logging impact are still like meaningful and you should still do them. But I think just the structured part is what makes this different for us.
Yeah, and it's also helped inform our distribution strategy. So often when we started, we did a project 3 or 4 years ago called Rape in the Fields about sexual assault of female farm workers in California. And we started to see, using the impact tracker tool, that a lot of advocacy groups were doing screenings of the documentary we produced about it. And then, we started to then see legislative action. So then when we did a follow-up project later, we kind of knew that we needed to proactively get the reporting to these advocacy groups because they were really the levers of change. And so it has helped us kind of understand where our content should go to get to the people who can really make a difference.
Hi, my name is Corinne Podger. I do consultancy work for media development projects. And I think the point that you've made about the time-limited nature of funding is quite interesting. What I'm curious about is often a project will begin to establish impact and then the funding runs out.
A collective.
Grown. So I'm curious. This is a new tool for me. I've not come across it. So one question I would have, among many, is are people able to share outcomes from this? In other words, this is a tool that an individual newsroom could use to track impact around a particular thing. But it sounds to me like something that you could make your results more open source, and also others who are working in the same space might be able to take the findings and say, well, these people have established impact here. Obviously, nothing is cookie cutter, no? But it sounds like something that could be expanded to say, well, if you're doing something like this, you will find this data helpful. You could also collaborate with this project who's run out of money. Just to be a bit more joined up. I think one of the pet peeves I have is that donor reports then just sit on a shelf somewhere. They are often proprietary information and it's very closed off. And I don't think it's in the interests of media development, as opposed to media for development, for that to continue to be the case. So I'm curious whether it can be opened up.
Yeah, this is like one of my pet project ideas. I talked to Annie about it a lot, but just I think one of the things with adoption and that of like reporters actually putting in the data is that they want to know that you're using it, and so a lot of times sending them the ways that we use it, right? Like they'll see it if we're doing audience work or writing to our members and things like that, but also like sending them the funding reports. But one of the things I think would be really interesting is being able to have a like external facing tool like you're talking about that at least pulls out some of it, and I think that for a lot of different reasons. But I think one of the biggest reasons could be that reporters would find that incredibly rewarding and then maybe enter more data from the start. So yeah, I totally agree with you. We just have to build it.
Just to jump in, that gave me an idea, which is the question before that question was about the extent to which you would be reporting this impact anyway journalistically. Now, the reason that you want to do the impact tracking is because there are categories of impact that would fall short of something that would justify a separate story,
right,
but that you might want to share. And it seems to me that one of the problems that we've all got is, the quality of comments, for example, and the things that we put on articles. And for example, having a record of impact at the end of your article, public-facing, engineering something like that, could be a terrific thing to do. I think it sounds like a really fascinating idea to explore.
Word. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
I'm Dr. Sulai Dreyfus from the School of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne. I'm interested in 2 points. One, there are perhaps lessons to be learned from citation index rating in the academic world that could be applied in this area in terms of rating. But the second is, how integrated and how open source are the integration tools if you want to feed things like output from Meltwater or Essentia, other media monitoring and media mention tools directly into this in automated fashions?
So it integrates with Meltwater.
Yeah, and it also integrates with Google Analytics, so I can just run a quick visualizer, but you can overlay your impact data with your Google Analytics. And you can also, Meltwater is the best tool to pull in, but it can be expensive. And so we also have some folks who use Google Alerts and have it ported in. It's not quite as seamless as Meltwater, though.
In the tool, I don't know if we mentioned this, but it is open source, so you can, it's on GitHub, you can fork it, and people can build on it as well. So, yes, I think Annie has a slide with that on there.
I haven't introduced myself earlier. Mir Milosevic, Executive Director of Global Forum for Media Development. We have a network of more than 200 media development organizations around the world, and we probably represent more than 50% of all media development assistance from donors and funders globally. And interestingly enough, we don't have a mechanism set up to feed this information about impact into some kind of a crowd-funded resource that we could share with donors. And that's one of the obstacles we face when we advocate for importance of journalism and media development for the overall democracy and now fighting misinformation and development in general. So this is one of the things that I'm actually discussing with some of our biggest members next week, to find a way to incorporate this into every project they do. So to have a setup, at least portion of the budget, where we will have a chance to feed this into our network and find a way to record this on the level of the sector in a better way. And any ideas or any suggestions that people in the room might have in this respect, I am very interested to hear them.
Anyone have good suggestions?
There?
Do you guys have any?
No, I don't have any. I don't have any good suggestions. I will think, though.
Question?
We can also talk after if you want.
One more.
Thank you. I'm Blair Greenbaum. I'm here with NPR. And I have a question about how, in the early stages, you guys set up this tool and how much developer expertise it takes on the front end to get this implemented and customized.
Yeah, so I mean, when we first built the tool, we worked closely with the developer for a couple of years as we kind of iterated on it. But then in terms of, you know, where it's at now, the open source version's pretty straightforward to install, and we also can provide information about our developer for folks who don't want to install it themselves or if you don't have staff capacity, but it's pretty easy to spin up a new impact tracker at this point because of the resources that we've put in to get it where it's at.
All right, maxed out on the questions. Well, we'll stick around if you guys have any questions or just want to talk through like your individual scenarios with us. But thanks so much for coming and spending some time with us.